In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the tasks application that we're going to build throughout this section. Now, I really wanted to jump in and start coding so that we can get a look at what it takes to build just a simple application. So we get an idea in our head when we start building complex applications, what it's really going to take. So what we're going to do is look at the app that we're going to build, and this app is going to have a Spring Boot backend and an Angular front end. And we're going to look at different ways that we can run them, build them, and just kind of create our applications. So with that, let's jump in. The first thing that we would do is create a standard Spring Boot application. You can see I have my pom.xml here. I have my dependencies, nothing kind of crazy going on here. If we look, we have our source main Java. We've broken our application up into controllers, domain, repository, and service. That's kind of what I do. Again, you can kind of do whatever you do normally. But the point is, this shouldn't look any different than a normal Spring Boot application that you're used to working with. What you may see a little funny here is this folder called front end. And so if we look in front end, this is our Angular application. We actually use the Angular CLI to scaffold us out a project, and we're going to do that inside of our Spring Boot project. Now, you could have done this in a separate folder somewhere else. Maybe in your organization you have two teams working on two different projects at once. There's a front-end team working on the Angular app. There's a back-end team working on the Spring Boot app, and that's fine. For me personally, I'm working on this app by myself, so I wanted to show you that you could include it right in your Spring Boot app so you have all this code together in one place. So if you look in the front end, we have our source, we have our app, we have a task component. So if you're familiar with Angular, and you should be at this point, you know that Angular is basically derived of different components. So we start with a top level component, and we kind of build our entire application based on this component architecture. So in our architecture here, we're going to have task component, like a main task component, and inside of there we'll have a couple subcomponents, one to add a new task and one to list out all of our tasks. So from a code standpoint, that's everything that's going on. In development here, I'm going to go ahead and run the Spring Boot application. So that's going to fire up, and while that's firing up, I'm also going to start up our Angular application. So we know that when we build out an application in Angular, we actually get, using the Angular CLI, we get this embedded server that we can run. So I'm actually running that. This basically just calls ngserve underneath the hood, but it does a couple other things for me. And this launches the application so that I can view it in the browser at localhost 4200. So when this is ready, I'm going to go ahead and fire that up and kind of walk you through what our simple tasks application does. Okay, so I'm over here and I'm at 4200. I'm just going to refresh this. And here's our simple application. We have this my task. This is a task component, and inside there we have a couple subcomponents. One is the add task and the other is the tasks list. So this actually reaches out to our Spring Boot application to get all of its data. And so if we wanted to, we can go ahead and check box here. And this is basically posting back to our Spring Boot application. And there's a completed property on that particular task, and we're just marking that as true. We also have a due date, and this is the list of tasks. I basically used a command line runner to go ahead and set up some initial data for this application. Now we can also come up here and we can add a new task. So we'll say hello everyone, and we can go ahead and say that that was completed. So again, very simple, but it's a good starting point to give you an idea of really what it takes to build out these kind of full applications using Spring Boot and Angular. So one other thing that we could do, if we go back to our application, we can stop this here. We're going to go ahead and stop this, and we can do some things. So if we wanted to go npm run build, we can go ahead and run our build, which is going to basically take everything and package it up for us. So it's going to use Webpack and bundle all of the static assets, if you will, the JavaScript files, the CSS files. It's going to drop the index.html, pack that up for us. And we're basically going to move all of that into our Spring Boot application, into the resources folder. So we know that anything that we put in the static folder in a Spring Boot application is going to allow us to run the Spring Boot app and serve it directly from there. So now if we come back over and run this app, when we go to localhost 8080, there's an index.html now in the static folder, so that is going to get served. And that's our Angular application. And then you'll see there's these bundles here, and this is Angular's job of basically packing the entire application up for us. So if we head back to the browser and go to 8080 and refresh this, that is our base application again. And again, we're using the H2 database, so that's why that particular task that we added before is no longer there. But we can add a new task, and that gets added to our task list. So again, this is the base application. Nothing fun, nothing kind of crazy going on here. But we're going to walk through how to build this entire application in this section. And this should give you a baseline for what it takes to build these apps. And then we'll go ahead and move forward and show you better ways to do this in further sections of this course. So with that, let's move on to the next lesson and start building our tasks app.